The story of the Church of Antioch begins with the rich and fascinating history of the ancient city of Antioch itself, a place where cultures, empires, and beliefs converged to shape one of the most important centers of early Christianity. Founded in the late 4th century BC by Seleucus I Nicator, one of the generals of Alexander the Great, Antioch quickly rose to prominence as a thriving metropolis. Strategically located along major trade routes between the East and the Mediterranean world, it became a melting pot of Greek, Roman, and Eastern influences. Its streets bustled with merchants, philosophers, and travelers, while its grand architecture and cultural vibrancy earned it a reputation as one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, often ranked just behind Rome and Alexandria in importance. Yet Antioch was not only a center of commerce and culture, it was also a city of deep religious diversity. Pagan temples, Jewish synagogues, and philosophical schools coexisted, creating an environment where ideas were constantly exchanged and challenged. It was precisely this diversity that would prepare the ground for something extraordinary, the birth and growth of a new faith that would change the course of history. It was in Antioch that the followers of Jesus Christ were first called Christians. This moment, recorded in the Acts of the Apostles, marks Antioch as a defining place in the identity of the early church. Here, the message of Christ moved beyond its Jewish roots and began to take on a universal character, reaching Gentiles and spreading rapidly across cultural boundaries. The Church of Antioch soon became one of the most influential centers of Christianity. It was a missionary hub, sending out apostles and evangelists to distant lands. Among those closely associated with Antioch were Paul the Apostle and Barnabas, who launched their missionary journeys from this very city. Their work helped carry the gospel far beyond its origins, establishing communities of believers throughout the Roman world. Leadership in Antioch also played a crucial role in shaping Christian theology and organization. Early bishops, including the renowned Ignatius of Antioch, guided the faithful during times of growth and persecution. Ignatius, in particular, left behind powerful writings that emphasized unity, faithfulness, and the importance of the church as a visible community bound together in Christ. Despite its prominence, Antioch faced many challenges over the centuries. Natural disasters, political upheavals, and invasions tested the resilience of the city and its Christian community. Yet, through it all, the Church of Antioch remained a beacon of faith, preserving its traditions and continuing to influence Christian thought and practice. Today, the legacy of Antioch endures. Though the ancient city has changed over time, its historical and spiritual significance remains immense. It stands as a reminder of how a diverse and dynamic environment can become fertile ground for faith to grow and spread. From its bustling streets emerged a community that would help define Christianity itself, earning Antioch its lasting place as one of the great pillars of the early church. The origins of Antioch are deeply rooted in the dramatic aftermath of the conquests of Alexander the Great. When his vast empire fragmented after his death, it was divided among his generals, each establishing powerful kingdoms across the known world. One of these realms, stretching across Syria and neighboring regions, fell into the hands of Seleucus I Nicator, a formidable leader and founder of the Seleucid dynasty. Around the year 300 BC, Seleucus set out to build not just a city, but a capital worthy of his expanding empire. On the banks of the lower Orontes River, about 20 miles inland from the Syrian coast, he chose a site both strategic and beautiful. This location lay just below Antigonia, the former capital of his defeated rival Antigonus I Monophthalmus, symbolizing not only a new beginning but also a decisive victory. From the ruins of past ambitions, Seleucus would establish a new center of power. He named the city Antioch, in honor of his father, Antiochus, a gesture that connected his legacy to his lineage and gave the city a personal and dynastic significance. But Antioch was more than a name, it was carefully designed to become the heart of his kingdom. Situated on the northern slope of Mount Silpius, the city enjoyed a commanding yet pleasant position. Its terrain offered both natural protection and scenic beauty, while its proximity to the Orontes River, flowing gracefully from east to west, provided access to vital trade routes and resources. The layout of Antioch reflected both ambition and foresight. Stretching from the mountain down to the river, the city combined natural geography with urban planning to create a thriving environment for commerce, governance, and culture. Its location made it a crossroads between East and West, a meeting point for diverse peoples, languages, and traditions. From its very foundation, Antioch was destined for greatness. What began as a strategic capital of a Hellenistic kingdom would, in time, grow into one of the most influential cities of the ancient world. Its streets would one day echo not only with the voices of merchants and rulers, but also with the message of a new faith that would change history. In this carefully chosen and richly endowed setting, the seeds were sown for Antioch to become not just a political center, but a spiritual one, playing a pivotal role in the unfolding story of Christianity.
From its carefully chosen beginnings, Antioch did not remain a modest capital for long. It expanded rapidly, growing into a vast and dynamic metropolis that reflected both the ambition of its founders and the opportunities of its location. As the population increased, new quarters and suburbs were added, each contributing to the city's growing importance. Over time, Antioch became so extensive that it was described as consisting of 4 distinct towns, each enclosed by its own walls, yet united within a single great rampart. This massive fortification, stretching all the way up to the summit of Mount Silpius and crowned by a strong citadel, gave the city both security and grandeur. This remarkable growth was not merely physical. It signaled Antioch's rising influence in the ancient world. Its position as a crossroads between East and West made it a hub of commerce, culture, and political power. Merchants, travelers, and officials passed through its gates, bringing with them ideas, goods, and traditions that enriched the life of the city.
A turning point came in 64 BC, when the Roman general Pompey incorporated Syria into the Roman Empire.
Rather than diminishing Antioch's importance, this new political reality elevated it even further. The city retained its status as the chief metropolis of the East, becoming one of the most significant urban centers under Roman rule. It also served as the residence of the Roman legates, the governors responsible for overseeing the province of Syria, making it a center of administration and authority. At its height, Antioch stood among the greatest cities of the empire. Alongside Rome and Alexandria, it ranked as one of the largest and most influential urban centers of the ancient world. Its population, estimated at over 500,000 people, testified to its vitality and attraction. Within its walls lived a diverse and vibrant community, representing a blend of cultures, languages, and traditions that made the city truly cosmopolitan. The prestige of Antioch was such that even Roman emperors, when traveling to the eastern regions of their empire, would choose to reside there. Their presence brought further honor and recognition, reinforcing the city's reputation as a place of significance and splendor. Antioch was not merely a provincial city, it was a stage upon which the power and culture of the Roman world were displayed. In this thriving and influential environment, Antioch continued to flourish, setting the stage for its later role in history, not only as a political and cultural capital, but as a place where ideas and beliefs would take root and spread far beyond its walls, shaping the course of civilizations to come. The ancient city of Antioch reached the height of its splendor through centuries of careful embellishment by both the Seleucid rulers and later the Roman authorities. Competing in prestige and ambition, these rulers transformed the city into one of the most magnificent urban centers of the ancient world, adorning it with a remarkable array of architectural and cultural wonders. Monumental statues stood throughout its streets, while grand theaters provided spaces for entertainment, drama, and public gatherings. Temples dedicated to the gods reflected the religious life of the city, and elaborate aqueducts ensured a steady supply of water for its growing population. Public baths became centers of social life, while carefully designed gardens, fountains, and cascading water features added beauty and refreshment to the urban landscape. Antioch was not merely a city of administration and commerce, it was a city designed for grandeur, comfort, and spectacle. One of its most striking features was a vast, elegant avenue that stretched for several miles from east to west. This impressive thoroughfare was lined with 4 rows of columns, forming continuous covered porticos on either side. It served not only as a major artery of movement and trade, but also as a symbol of Antioch's architectural sophistication and urban planning. Walking along this grand boulevard, one would experience both the scale and refinement of a city at the peak of its prosperity. Beyond the city walls, approximately 4 to 5 miles to the west, lay one of Antioch's most celebrated leisure retreats, the Grove of Daphne. This lush sanctuary of laurels and cypresses was famed for its natural beauty and serene, park-like atmosphere. It offered a striking contrast to the bustling city, serving as a place of relaxation, celebration, and religious devotion. At the heart of Daphne stood a magnificent temple dedicated to Apollo, drawing worshippers and visitors from across the region. The site was especially renowned for its elaborate religious festivals, held each year in the month of August. These celebrations were marked by grandeur, procession, and ceremonial splendor, reflecting both the cultural richness and religious traditions of the Greco-Roman world. Together, the city of Antioch and its surrounding sanctuaries like Daphne illustrate a civilization at its height, where architecture, religion, nature, and public life blended into a vivid expression of ancient urban greatness. The ancient city of Antioch, at times referred to by the additional name Epidaphnes, was renowned not only for its grandeur and strategic importance, but also for its remarkable diversity and complex social character. From its earliest development under Seleucid rule, the city became a true crossroads of civilizations, drawing together people from across the known world. Its population was a vivid mixture of cultures and ethnicities. Among its inhabitants were Macedonians and Greeks, the original settlers and dominant cultural influence of the city, alongside native Syrians and Phoenicians who brought deep regional traditions. A significant Jewish community also lived within its walls, contributing to its religious and cultural diversity, while Romans held positions of authority and influence as the city became integrated into the broader imperial system. In addition, people from distant parts of Asia were drawn to Antioch, attracted by its prosperity and the generous policy of citizenship established by Seleucus, which allowed many to become part of the city's civic life. Despite this rich blend of cultures, Antioch retained a strongly Greek identity in language, architecture, and public life. Greek customs, education, and civic organization shaped its character, making it one of the major Hellenistic centers of the ancient world. However, the reputation of its inhabitants was not without criticism. Ancient sources often describe the people of Antioch as being more devoted to pleasure and entertainment than to intellectual or moral refinement. The city became famous for its wit, humor, and sharp sarcasm, qualities that made its citizens both entertaining and, at times, cutting in their social interactions. This reputation for satire and lightheartedness was widely recognized and is echoed in historical writings that have survived through the centuries. Much of what is known about the social character of Antioch comes from later observers and writers such as John Chrysostom, the rhetorician Libanius, and the Roman Emperor Julian the Apostate, whose works and correspondence provide vivid glimpses into the city's life and personality. Through their accounts, Antioch emerges as a place of brilliance and contradiction, cultured yet indulgent, sophisticated yet playful, admired yet sometimes criticized. Politically, the city's loyalty to imperial authority was not always steady. While it held a position of importance within the Roman Empire and often hosted emperors and governors, its population could be unpredictable, reflecting the same independence and spirited nature that characterized its social life. In this way, Antioch stood as a vibrant and complex metropolis, rich in diversity, culture, and influence, yet also marked by the tensions and contradictions that come with greatness. It was a city where East met West, where many peoples lived side by side, and where history, culture, and personality combined to form one of the most fascinating urban centers of the ancient world. Despite the many cultural and moral challenges associated with Antioch, the city was never entirely devoid of deeper intellectual and spiritual reflection. Even within a society often criticized for its indulgence and liveliness, there remained a persistent presence of men devoted to serious thought and religious inquiry. This was especially evident within the Jewish community, where contemplation of faith, tradition, and divine law continued to flourish amid the city's diverse and often turbulent environment. However, as the centuries progressed, Antioch's fortunes began to decline significantly. After the 5th century, the city gradually lost much of its earlier grandeur, shrinking in both size and influence. Once one of the greatest urban centers of the ancient world, it increasingly faced the combined pressures of natural disasters and political upheaval that would reshape its destiny. Among the most destructive forces affecting Antioch were earthquakes, which struck the region repeatedly over many centuries. Historical records indicate that the city endured at least 10 major earthquakes from the 2nd century BC through the end of the 6th century AD. Each seismic event weakened its structures, damaged its infrastructure, and contributed to a slow but steady erosion of its former glory. In addition to these natural calamities, Antioch also suffered devastating military attacks. It was captured and sacked twice by the Persians, first in AD 260 and again in AD 540. These invasions brought widespread destruction, loss of life, and severe damage to the city's buildings and cultural heritage. The second assault was particularly catastrophic, leaving Antioch nearly obliterated and marking a turning point in its long and storied history. Yet even in ruin, the city was not abandoned entirely. Following its near-total destruction in 540, Antioch was rebuilt under the direction of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I. However, the restored city was no longer the vast metropolis it once had been. It was reconstructed on a much smaller and more modest scale, reflecting both the diminished resources of the time and the altered political realities of the region. In recognition of its renewal and transformation, the rebuilt city was given a new name, Theopolis, meaning City of God. This renaming symbolized not only physical reconstruction but also a shift in identity, from a grand imperial capital of antiquity to a smaller, spiritually marked city shaped by the changing tides of history. Thus, the story of Antioch is one of both brilliance and decline, of repeated destruction and partial restoration. It stands as a powerful reminder of the fragility of human achievement, but also of the enduring hope that even after devastation, cities and civilizations can be reborn in new forms.
The later history of Antioch is a striking story of endurance, conquest, and gradual transformation across many centuries. Even long after its ancient grandeur had faded, remnants of its powerful past continued to stand as silent witnesses to its former greatness. It is recorded that substantial portions of its defensive walls survived until as late as 1825, offering a rare glimpse into the military architecture of the 6th century and reminding later generations of the city's once formidable strength and strategic importance. From the early medieval period onward, Antioch became a focal point of repeated conquests as empires and powers struggled for control of the region. In 638, the city was captured by the Mohammedans, marking a major shift in its political and cultural landscape. Later, in 969, it was restored to the Byzantine Empire, briefly returning to Christian rule and imperial influence. However, this stability did not last long, as the city was reconquered in 1084 by the Seljuk Turks, further reflecting the turbulent dynamics of the region during the medieval era. The city's strategic significance continued into the era of the Crusades. From 1098 to 1268, Antioch came under the control of the Crusaders and their descendants, becoming one of the key strongholds of Latin Christian power in the East. During this period, it once again played a prominent role in the broader conflict between East and West, Christianity and Islam. Yet this era too came to an end when the Sultan Bibars of Egypt captured the city in 1268, bringing Crusader rule to a close. Centuries later, in 1517, Antioch, along with the rest of Syria, was incorporated into the expanding Ottoman Empire, placing it under Turkish rule. From that point onward, its political significance continued to diminish as the great city of antiquity slowly transitioned into a quieter provincial town. What was once one of the most populous and influential metropolises of the eastern Mediterranean gradually declined over time. The ancient city that had once stood alongside Rome and Alexandria in importance is today known as Antakya, a modest town of approximately 20,000 inhabitants. Thus, the long and dramatic history of Antioch reflects the rise and fall of civilizations themselves, an enduring city that witnessed empires come and go, yet never completely vanished, carrying within it the layered memory of centuries of human history. Because Antioch was already a major center of government, trade, and culture, it became one of the earliest and most important locations for the rapid spread of the Christian faith. Its strategic importance and diverse population made it fertile ground for new ideas, including the message of Jesus Christ, which began to take root there from the very beginning of the Church's expansion. Among the earliest connections to Antioch is the mention of Nicholas of Antioch, one of the 7 deacons chosen in Jerusalem, showing that the city was already linked to the earliest Christian leadership. The spread of Christianity into Antioch intensified after the martyrdom of Saint Stephen, when persecution in Jerusalem forced many believers to flee. These displaced disciples, including followers from Cyprus and Cyrene, carried the gospel beyond Judea and into new territories. Arriving in Antioch, they began preaching not only to the Jewish community but also boldly to the Greeks and Gentiles. This was a turning point, as the message of Christ began to move beyond its original cultural boundaries and reach a far more diverse audience. As a result, large numbers of people embraced the new faith, and the Christian community in Antioch grew rapidly. News of this growing movement eventually reached the mother church in Jerusalem. Concerned and eager to support the developing community, the apostles sent Barnabas to Antioch to strengthen and guide the believers. Recognizing the importance of the mission, Barnabas later traveled to Tarsus to bring Paul the apostle to assist in the work. Together, they spent an entire year in Antioch, teaching, preaching, and nurturing the growing community of believers. Their efforts were remarkably successful. The Christian movement in Antioch became so distinct and well-established that it marked a new stage in the history of the Church. It was in this city that the followers of Christ were first given a unique identity, and the disciples were first called Christians. This moment signified not only the growth of a community but the birth of a name that would define a global faith for centuries to come. The early Christian community in Antioch quickly distinguished itself not only by its rapid growth but also by its spirit of charity and active concern for the wider church. One of the clearest expressions of this generosity was the assistance they sent to their fellow believers in Judea during a time of severe famine. This act of solidarity showed that the church in Antioch was already deeply connected to the broader Christian community and willing to share its resources with those in need, even across great distances. The importance of Antioch within early Christianity is further highlighted by the visit of Saint Peter, who is believed to have come to the city around AD 44. According to tradition, he remained there for a significant period, strengthening the community and contributing to its development. His presence underscores the growing significance of Antioch as a major center of Christian life and thought in the first decades after the resurrection of Jesus Christ. At the heart of the Antiochene community was a diverse membership, including a large number of Greeks and Gentiles. This diversity naturally led to different perspectives on how the Christian faith should be lived and understood. A major issue arose between this community and certain members of the church in Jerusalem, where some believers insisted that Gentile converts must first adopt Jewish customs and follow the Mosaic law, practices such as circumcision, before fully entering the Christian faith. This position created significant tension, as it seemed to place heavy cultural and religious barriers before non-Jewish converts, effectively limiting the universal reach of Christianity. The believers in Antioch strongly opposed this view, advocating instead for a faith centered on Christ rather than strict adherence to the old legal requirements. Their stance emphasized spiritual freedom and the idea that salvation through Christ was available to all, regardless of cultural or ethnic background. This crucial debate was championed by Paul the Apostle and Barnabas, who defended the position of the Antiochene Christians. Their arguments eventually led to the convening of the Apostolic Council in Jerusalem, where the issue was carefully discussed and ultimately resolved in favor of Christian liberty for Gentile converts. The decision affirmed that non-Jews did not need to fully adopt the Mosaic law to become followers of Christ, marking a decisive moment in the expansion of the early church. Through its charity, theological insight, and courageous advocacy for inclusivity, Antioch played a foundational role in shaping the universal nature of Christianity, helping to ensure that the message of Christ would extend beyond cultural and ethnic boundaries to all peoples. The Church of Antioch quickly emerged as one of the most dynamic and influential centers of early Christianity, shaping not only doctrine but also the global mission of the Church. As theological debates unfolded, Antioch stood firmly as a place where the true spirit of Christian freedom was defended and lived out. One of the most striking moments illustrating this was when Paul the Apostle openly upheld the principle of liberty in Christ, even in a difficult confrontation with St. Peter. This bold stand was not born of division, but of a deep conviction that the message of Jesus Christ must remain open to all people without unnecessary barriers. From this strong foundation, Antioch soon became a vibrant center of missionary activity. It was from this very city that Paul and his companions set out on their great journeys to spread the gospel to the nations. Antioch was not merely a place of belief, it was a launching ground for action, a community that actively participated in the expansion of Christianity far beyond its original boundaries. From its streets began missions that would carry the message of Christ across Asia Minor, into Greece, and eventually throughout the Roman world. At the same time, the church in Antioch developed a well-structured and organized leadership. Remarkably, it preserved a complete record of its bishops from the earliest days, reflecting a strong sense of continuity and order. Among its first leaders was Evodius of Antioch, who is believed to have served during the Apostolic Age. This connection to the very beginnings of the Church gave Antioch a special authority and prestige among Christian communities. As the years passed, Antioch's importance only grew. At a very early stage, it became the focal point for Christian life and activity throughout the East. Its influence extended across regions, guiding communities, shaping theological thought, and supporting missionary efforts. This role became even more significant after the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. With the destruction of the original center of Christianity, Antioch naturally rose to prominence as the leading city of the faith in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. It became, in effect, the new metropolis of Christianity in those regions, a place where leadership, teaching, and missionary zeal converged. Thus, Antioch stands in history not merely as a great city, but as a cornerstone of the early church, a place where faith was defended, organized, and sent forth to transform the world. As the centuries passed, the Christian community in Antioch continued to grow with remarkable strength and vitality. What had begun as a small group of believers gradually expanded into a powerful and visible presence, so much so that by the early 4th century Antioch was regarded as, in many ways, a predominantly Christian city. The faith that had once been quietly preached in homes and small gatherings now shaped the very identity of the city itself. This transformation was clearly reflected in the city's architecture. Numerous churches were built to accommodate the growing number of worshippers devoted to Jesus Christ. These sacred spaces were not only places of prayer but also visible signs of Christianity's triumph and permanence in a city once known for its pagan temples and diverse religious practices. Among these early Christian monuments, one stood out in particular, a basilica known as the Ancient or Apostolic. This church was believed to be one of the oldest surviving architectural expressions of the Christian faith. According to a venerable tradition, it may even have originated as the house of Theophilus, the friend of Luke the Evangelist, to whom the Acts of the Apostles is addressed. If true, this would make it not only a place of worship but a direct link to the very beginnings of the Church's history. In addition to this ancient basilica, Antioch was adorned with other sanctuaries dedicated to the memory of the great apostles, St. Peter, Paul the Apostle, and John the Apostle. These shrines served as reminders of the foundational figures who had shaped the Church and whose presence, whether physical or spiritual, was deeply associated with the city's early Christian life. The richness of Antioch's Christian heritage is further highlighted by references from later church leaders such as Augustine of Hippo. He speaks of a Basilica of the Holy Maccabees, a renowned sanctuary that flourished between the 4th and 6th centuries. This shrine, dedicated to the memory of the Maccabean martyrs, became an important center of devotion and pilgrimage, reflecting the deep reverence for those who had suffered and died for their faith. Altogether, these churches and sanctuaries paint a vivid picture of Antioch as a thriving center of Christian worship and tradition. The city, once a crossroads of pagan beliefs and cultures, had been transformed into a beacon of the Christian faith, its streets and buildings bearing witness to a community rooted in history, strengthened by devotion, and united in its commitment to Christ. As Christianity continued to flourish in Antioch, the transformation of the city became even more visible, not only in its people, but in its very buildings. Structures that had once been dedicated to pagan worship were gradually reclaimed and consecrated for Christian use, symbolizing the profound spiritual shift that had taken place. One of the most striking examples of this transformation was the celebrated Temple of Fortune, also known as the Tychion. Once a center of pagan devotion, it was repurposed by Christians and became a sacred space that enshrined the remains of one of Antioch's most revered figures, Ignatius of Antioch. Ignatius, a bishop and martyr of immense importance in the early church, became a powerful symbol of faith and sacrifice. By placing his relics within a former pagan temple, the Christians of Antioch made a bold and meaningful statement. The old order had passed, and a new era, centered on Christ, had taken its place. The very walls that once echoed with pagan rituals now bore witness to the triumph of Christian devotion. Another significant site in the city was the martyrium dedicated to Babylos of Antioch, a bishop who suffered martyrdom during the persecution under Emperor Decius in the 3rd century. This memorial shrine served not only as a place of remembrance but also as a source of inspiration for the faithful. It reminded believers of the cost of discipleship and the courage required to remain steadfast in times of trial. Beyond these prominent shrines, the region surrounding Antioch became a fertile ground for the development of Christian architecture. Both domestic and religious buildings began to reflect the needs and values of a growing Christian population. Homes were adapted to include spaces for prayer and gathering, while churches and communal structures evolved in design and purpose. Scholars such as Melchior de Vogue and Howard Crosby Butler have documented these developments, revealing how architecture in central Syria adapted to support both daily life and religious practice in a Christian society. In addition, the area around Antioch would later become known for its important contributions to monastic architecture, as communities of monks sought solitude and spiritual discipline in the surrounding landscapes. Though these developments belong to a broader narrative, they further highlight how Antioch was not only a center of urban Christianity but also a launching point for deeper spiritual movements. Altogether, these transformations show a city undergoing a profound redefinition of its identity. Antioch was no longer simply a great city of the ancient world, it had become a living testament to the growth, resilience, and creative expression of early Christianity, where even the remnants of paganism were reshaped into symbols of faith and victory. The Christian history of Antioch reached one of its most remarkable heights during the reign of the Emperor Constantine the Great, who played a decisive role in the establishment and expansion of Christianity within the Roman Empire. Recognizing Antioch's importance as a leading center of the faith in the East, Constantine commissioned the construction of a magnificent church in the city. This sacred building was adorned with exceptional richness and beauty, becoming so impressive that it was widely admired by contemporary observers. Writers such as John Chrysostom and Eusebius of Caesarea record its grandeur, emphasizing how it stood as a symbol of the growing dignity and public presence of Christianity in the imperial world. Although this great church would later suffer severe damage when it was pillaged by the Persian ruler Khosrow I in AD 540, it was not completely destroyed. Even in its damaged state, it remained a powerful reminder of Antioch's enduring significance as a center of Christian life and worship. Throughout its history, the Church of Antioch consistently demonstrated its importance as one of the principal centers of Christianity in the East. During periods of persecution, it produced a remarkable number of martyrs who bore witness to their faith with courage and steadfastness. Notably, its bishops often led by example, sharing in the sufferings of their people and strengthening the resolve of the Christian community. Among the most significant figures associated with Antioch is Ignatius of Antioch, a leading figure of the early 2nd century whose martyrdom became a defining moment for the Church. In later periods, other bishops and leaders continued this legacy of witness and sacrifice, including Asclepiades of Antioch during the reign of Septimius Severus, 193–211, and Babylos of Antioch, who suffered under the persecution of Emperor Decius, 249–251. Their lives and deaths reflected the enduring strength of the Christian community in Antioch, even in the face of severe oppression. Beyond its martyrs, Antioch also became a fertile ground for theological thought, writing, and leadership. It produced numerous influential figures who contributed to the intellectual and spiritual development of Christianity through their teachings, writings, and pastoral work. These individuals helped shape the doctrines, traditions, and missionary spirit of the early church, ensuring that Antioch's influence extended far beyond its geographical boundaries. In this way, Antioch stood not only as a physical city of grandeur and resilience but also as a spiritual powerhouse, a place where faith was tested, strengthened, and proclaimed, leaving a lasting legacy in the history of Christianity. The intellectual and religious history of Antioch reveals it not only as a political and cultural powerhouse, but also as one of the most influential centers in the development of early Christian thought. Among the earliest and most celebrated contributions to Christian literature are the letters of Ignatius of Antioch, whose writings became foundational texts for understanding early church theology, unity, and martyrdom. His voice echoed far beyond his lifetime, shaping Christian identity across generations. In the later 2nd century, another important figure, Theophilus of Antioch, produced a detailed and systematic defense of the Christian faith. His writings helped articulate Christian beliefs in a world still largely dominated by pagan philosophy and misunderstanding, offering one of the earliest structured explanations of Christian doctrine. As the centuries progressed, Antioch continued to produce influential leaders and theologians who shaped the direction of Christianity. Among them was Flavian of Antioch, who worked tirelessly to heal divisions within the church, particularly those caused by the Arian controversy. His efforts reflected Antioch's ongoing struggle to maintain unity amid intense theological debate. Another towering figure associated with the city was John Chrysostom, renowned for his powerful preaching and moral teachings, and later Theodoret of Cyrus, who contributed significantly to biblical interpretation and theological writing. Both men represent the intellectual brilliance that emerged from the Antiochene tradition and influenced the wider Christian world. However, Antioch was also a center of intense theological controversy. Several major heresies originated or developed there, shaping some of the most important doctrinal debates in early Christianity. In the 3rd century, Paul of Samosata, who served as bishop of Antioch, promoted teachings later deemed erroneous, marking one of the earliest significant doctrinal conflicts in the church's history. The city also played a crucial role in the development of major theological movements. Arianism, one of the most significant controversies in early Christianity, found its intellectual roots not in Alexandria, as sometimes assumed, but in the broader Syrian intellectual environment associated with Antioch. From this tradition also emerged influences that contributed to Nestorianism, through thinkers such as Theodore of Mopsuestia and Nestorius. These debates deeply shaped the course of Christian doctrine and ecclesiastical history for centuries. Alongside theological disputes, Antioch also experienced frequent and often violent tensions between its Jewish and Christian populations. Historical records describe repeated conflicts, including seditions and massacres from the late 4th century to the early 7th century. These episodes reflect the city's complex social fabric, where diverse religious communities coexisted but often clashed under political, cultural, and theological pressures. Overall, Antioch emerges as a city of extraordinary intellectual vitality and deep religious significance, both a cradle of Christian thought and a stage for some of its most profound controversies. Its legacy is marked by brilliance and conflict alike, shaping the theological foundations and historical trajectory of Christianity across the ancient world. As the early Christian church gradually developed its structure and organization, the Church of Antioch naturally emerged as one of its most influential centers of authority in the East. Due to its prestigious origin, strategic importance, and wide-reaching influence, Antioch became more than just a local Christian community. It evolved into a hub of higher ecclesiastical jurisdiction, shaping the direction of surrounding churches across vast regions. Evidence of this growing authority appears already in the earliest centuries of Christianity. Toward the end of the 2nd century, Serapion of Antioch exercised his pastoral and doctrinal authority beyond the immediate boundaries of Syria. He provided guidance to the Christian community of Rosses in Cilicia regarding the so-called apocryphal Gospel of St. Peter, demonstrating that the Church of Antioch had begun to influence Christian communities outside its own region. Tradition also attributes to Serapion the consecration of the third bishop of Edessa, a city that at the time lay outside the Roman Empire. This further illustrates the expanding spiritual reach of Antioch's ecclesiastical leadership. By the middle of the 3rd century, this regional authority had become even more evident through the holding of major councils in Antioch. These gatherings brought together bishops from a wide geographical area, including Syria, Palestine, Arabia, and the eastern provinces of Asia Minor. Such assemblies show that Antioch was functioning as a central coordinating authority for the Christian communities of the East, helping to resolve doctrinal issues and strengthen unity across diverse regions. This prominence was also recognized by other major church leaders of the time. Dionysius of Alexandria referred to these assembled bishops as forming the Episcopate of the Orient, highlighting their collective importance in the governance of the Church. Among them, Demetrian of Antioch is mentioned in a leading position, underscoring Antioch's preeminent role within this Eastern ecclesiastical structure. The authority of Antioch continued to be affirmed into the early 4th century. At the Council of Ancyra in 314, presided over by Vitalis of Antioch, representatives from many of the same regions once again gathered, showing the continuity of Antioch's influence over a broad network of churches. Taken together, these developments reveal that Antioch was not merely an important local church, but a true center of coordination and leadership for much of the early Christian East. Its bishops played a decisive role in guiding doctrine, organizing councils, and maintaining unity among diverse Christian communities spread across multiple provinces and even beyond imperial boundaries. In the structure of the early Christian world, the churches of the East, a broad grouping of Roman provinces collectively known in historical sources as Oriens Christianus, naturally tended to gravitate toward the influence and leadership of the Church of Antioch. From very early times, the Bishop of Antioch held a position of special authority, exercising a form of jurisdiction and guidance over many of the surrounding Christian communities across the eastern regions of the Roman Empire. This traditional role was not only widely recognized but eventually formalized by the Universal Church. The First Council of Nicaea in AD 325 confirmed this established order. In its 6th canon, the council explicitly decreed that the ancient privileges of the Church of Antioch were to be preserved, thereby affirming its historic authority and continuing influence over the Eastern episcopal structure. Later, the First Council of Constantinople further clarified and defined the extent of Antioch's jurisdiction. According to its 2nd canon, the authority of the Bishop of Antioch was formally limited to the civil diocese of the East, which included the far eastern provinces of the Roman Empire. This ruling both recognized Antioch's importance and simultaneously defined its boundaries within the evolving administrative structure of the Church. As the centuries progressed, the organization of the Church continued to evolve, leading to further adjustments in ecclesiastical jurisdiction. At the Council of Ephesus, the bishops of Cyprus were declared independent of Antioch, marking an important step in the decentralization of its authority. Later, at the Council of Chalcedon, additional changes were made when the 3 provinces of Palestine were separated from Antioch and placed under the jurisdiction of the Bishop of Jerusalem. Taken together, these decisions reflect both the enduring importance and the gradual redefinition of Antioch's role within the early Church. While its influence over the Eastern Christian world remained significant, the evolving structure of ecclesiastical governance gradually redistributed its authority, shaping a more organized and regionally balanced church. Nonetheless, Antioch's early leadership and foundational role left a lasting imprint on the history and organization of Christianity throughout the East. From the historical development of the early Church, it becomes clear that the authority of the Church of Antioch was both extensive and gradually refined over time. In the earliest centuries of Christianity, the jurisdiction of the Bishop of Antioch extended broadly across Christian communities even beyond the boundaries of the Roman Empire. This wide influence reflected the city's status as one of the most important centers of Christian life and organization in the East. Over time, however, this expansive authority became more clearly defined. The proper and recognized sphere of Antioch's ecclesiastical jurisdiction came to include primarily Syria, Palestine, and parts of Eastern Asia Minor. As the administrative structure of the church developed, these boundaries were gradually narrowed. By the middle of the 5th century, the authority of Antioch had been further restricted, largely encompassing only the northern portion of the civil diocese of the East, along with certain communities outside the Roman Empire. This evolution reflects the Church's broader effort to organize itself more systematically across different regions. Because of its elevated status, the Bishop of Antioch came to hold the distinguished title of Patriarch of Antioch. This title placed him among the highest-ranking ecclesiastical leaders of the Christian world, alongside other patriarchs of similar rank. As Patriarch, his authority extended not only over individual Christian believers within his jurisdiction but also over the metropolitan bishops and ordinary bishops who governed the local churches within his patriarchate. This hierarchical structure reinforced Antioch's role as a central governing authority in the Eastern Church. An additional historical detail highlights the importance of Antioch even in earlier centuries. In the early 4th century, the Church of Rome itself held property in Antioch, including holdings in both the older and newer sections of the city, as well as within the Jewish quarter. These references, preserved in ancient records such as the Liber Pontificalis, indicate the presence and influence of the Roman Church within Antioch's diverse urban landscape, further emphasizing the city's significance within the wider Christian world. Taken together, these developments illustrate how Antioch evolved from a broadly influential center of early Christianity into a clearly defined patriarchal jurisdiction. While its territorial scope changed over time, its authority remained deeply significant, shaping the organization and governance of the Church in the East and leaving a lasting legacy in Christian history. After reaching a position of great prominence in the early centuries of Christianity, the Church of Antioch gradually experienced a decline in influence beginning in the mid-5th century. This weakening of authority was not sudden, but the result of several political, theological, and external pressures that reshaped the balance of power within the Eastern Church. One of the major factors in this decline was the rising prominence of the Church of Constantinople. As the bishops of Constantinople increasingly sought primacy within the Eastern Christian world, they gradually expanded their influence over other patriarchates, including Antioch. Over time, this growing authority significantly diminished Antioch's independent role, placing it under the stronger administrative and political weight of Constantinople's leadership. At the same time, internal theological divisions further weakened the unity and stability of the Antiochene Patriarchate. In the latter part of the 5th century, the rise of the Monophysite movement created deep divisions within the Church. Under the leadership of figures such as Peter the Fuller, attempts were made to take control of the Patriarchal See of Antioch and establish a parallel ecclesiastical structure. These tensions reflected broader Christological disputes that were shaking the entire Christian world at the time. Following the death of Monophysite leader Severus of Antioch in 539, his followers continued to assert their influence by electing their own rival patriarchs of Antioch. This led to a period of division in which competing lines of leadership existed within the same patriarchal tradition, further weakening the unity and authority of the see. The situation became even more complex after the Muslim conquest of Antioch in 638 by the Saracens. With the change in political rule, the continuity of the Orthodox patriarchal succession became irregular and unstable. The new rulers of the city often favored the Monophysite faction, which resulted in additional difficulties for the Orthodox patriarchs, who faced political obstacles, reduced stability, and diminished influence. As a result of these combined pressures, external conquest, internal theological division, and the growing dominance of Constantinople, the Patriarchate of Antioch lost much of its earlier prestige and centralized authority. Once a leading force in shaping the Christian East, it entered a prolonged period of fragmentation and reduced influence, while still remaining an important, though weakened, center of Christian tradition and identity. In the later history of the Church of Antioch, its once unified patriarchate became increasingly fragmented as major theological and political divisions reshaped the Christian East. A pivotal moment came with the emergence of the Greek or Eastern Orthodox schism in the 11th century. At that time, the Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch, influenced heavily by long-standing Byzantine control, became aligned with the break from communion with the Roman Catholic Church. Despite repeated and sustained efforts by the Apostolic See to restore unity, this division persisted, leaving the Patriarchate outside full communion with Rome. Over time, the physical center of the Patriarchate also shifted. The Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Antioch no longer resides in the ancient city itself, which had long since declined in political and strategic importance. Instead, his seat is now established in Damascus, reflecting the broader historical movement of ecclesiastical centers away from the once great metropolis of Antioch. However, the fragmentation of the Antiochene Patriarchate was not solely the result of the Greek schism. Earlier divisions had already weakened its unity. One of the most significant was the rise of the Nestorian movement following its condemnation at the Council of Ephesus in 431. Many Nestorian Christians migrated eastward into Persia, where they rapidly grew in strength and influence. By the end of the 5th century, under the leadership of Babai of Seleucia, the community had effectively broken away from Antioch's authority. They established their own independent patriarchate, initially centered in Seleucia and later transferred to Baghdad, marking a major expansion of Christianity into the east outside the Roman sphere. Meanwhile, other Eastern Christian communities that remained in communion with Rome also developed distinct patriarchal structures. The Syrians, who stayed united with the Roman Church, now commonly referred to as the Chaldeans, maintained their own patriarch, known as the Patriarch of Babylonia, who resides in Mosul. This reflects the continued diversity within the broader Christian tradition originating from the Antiochene heritage. In addition, several Eastern Catholic communities also preserve patriarchal titles linked to Antioch. Among them are the Maronite Church, the Melkite Greek Catholic Church, and the Syriac Catholic Church. Each of these traditions maintains its own Patriarch of Antioch, reflecting different historical paths of development, reunion, and continuity within the wider Christian world. Thus, what began as a single, powerful patriarchate centered in Antioch gradually evolved into a complex network of churches and jurisdictions. Though the ancient city itself declined, its spiritual legacy continued to shape diverse Christian communities across the Middle East and beyond, each preserving in its own way the memory and authority of Antioch's foundational role in Christian history. The history of Antioch during the era of the Crusades reveals yet another dramatic chapter in its long and complex story, a time marked by shifting power, competing patriarchates, and the intersection of Eastern and Western Christianity. When the Crusaders captured Antioch in 1098, they initially sought to restore continuity by reinstating a Greek patriarch, John IV of Antioch. However, this arrangement soon proved impractical. Within a short time, John IV realized that he was ill-suited to govern a predominantly Western, Latin Christian population that had taken control of the city. Recognizing the growing divide between Eastern and Western traditions, he withdrew to Constantinople, leaving the patriarchal seat effectively vacant in Antioch. In response, the Latin Crusaders moved quickly to establish their own ecclesiastical leadership. Around the year 1100, they elected a Latin patriarch, Bernard of Valence, a clergyman who had arrived in the east with the crusading forces. From that point onward, Antioch became the seat of a Latin patriarchate, marking a clear shift in religious authority aligned with Western Christianity. This Latin patriarchate continued for over a century and a half, overseeing not only Antioch itself but also extending its jurisdiction over the Crusader-controlled territories of Edessa and Tripoli. Later, toward the end of the 12th century, its influence expanded further to include the island of Cyprus. Despite this broad jurisdiction, the Latin patriarchs were much more closely tied to and dependent upon the authority of the popes in Rome than their Greek predecessors had been. Meanwhile, the Greek Orthodox Church did not abandon its claim to Antioch. Greek patriarchs continued to be appointed, though they typically resided in Constantinople rather than in Antioch itself. This resulted in a dual structure, with parallel lines of patriarchs, Latin in the city and Greek in exile, each maintaining its own continuity and claim to legitimacy. The Crusader period came to a dramatic and tragic end in 1268, when the powerful Mamluk ruler Baibars captured Antioch. During this conquest, the last resident Latin patriarch, Christian of Antioch, was put to death. With this event, the Latin Christian presence in Antioch effectively collapsed, and the city passed permanently out of Crusader hands. Even after the fall of Antioch, the papacy continued to appoint Latin patriarchs. However, these figures could no longer reside in the city or exercise real authority there. Over time, the role became purely titular. By the mid-14th century, the title of Latin Patriarch of Antioch had evolved into an honorary dignity rather than an active office. Today, the title still exists, though it carries no governing power. It is granted to a church official who resides in Rome, often associated with the Basilica of St. Mary, Massachusetts, Jor, serving as a symbolic link to the once great patriarchate. Thus, the Crusader period added yet another layer to Antioch's rich and complex ecclesiastical history, a time of division, adaptation, and eventual transformation, reflecting the broader struggles and transitions within Christianity across East and West. Because of its immense importance in the early Christian world, Antioch became a natural gathering place for councils, debates, and synods that helped shape the doctrine and discipline of the Church. Its position as a major spiritual and administrative center meant that key questions of faith were often brought there for discussion and resolution. Over time, a tradition arose suggesting that even the apostles themselves had once held a council in Antioch. This belief, mentioned by Pope Innocent I and later writers, held that it was in Antioch that the followers of Jesus Christ were formally given the name Christians, and that important instructions were issued to early missionaries and converts. While this tradition reflects the deep reverence for Antioch's role in Christian origins, later scholars, such as Cardinal Hergenrother, have pointed out that these so-called canons are not authentic records, but rather later compilations drawn from the Acts of the Apostles and other early writings. Even so, the existence of such a tradition highlights how closely Antioch was associated with the very beginnings of Christian identity. Historically verified councils also took place in Antioch, especially during times of doctrinal controversy. Around the year 251, a significant synod was either held or at least planned in the city to address the growing issue of Novatianism, a movement that raised difficult questions about repentance and the reconciliation of those who had lapsed during persecution. The matter was particularly important because Fabius of Antioch, the bishop of the city at the time, was inclined toward this stricter position. This situation drew the attention of several prominent bishops from across the Eastern Church. Among them were Helenus of Tarsus, Firmilian of Caesarea, and Theocritus of Caesarea, all of whom were deeply engaged in the theological debates of the time. They also invited Dionysius of Alexandria, a respected leader and theologian, to participate in the discussion. These gatherings demonstrate how Antioch functioned as a meeting point for the leading minds of the early Church. It was a place where difficult questions were not avoided but confronted, where unity was sought through dialogue, and where the foundations of Christian teaching were clarified and strengthened. In this way, Antioch's legacy is not only one of missionary zeal and ecclesiastical authority, but also of thoughtful deliberation. Through its councils and synods, the city helped guide the Church through some of its earliest and most challenging debates, leaving a lasting imprint on the development of Christian doctrine and identity. The unfolding history of the Church of Antioch reveals not only its importance, but also the intense doctrinal struggles that helped shape the foundations of Christian belief. One such episode began with the controversy surrounding Novatianism. Though the issue initially stirred concern, especially due to the position of Fabius of Antioch, who leaned toward stricter views on the reconciliation of those who had lapsed during persecution, it ultimately faded without major consequence. This was largely because Fabius died shortly thereafter and was succeeded by Demetrian of Antioch, whose more moderate stance helped restore balance and unity within the community. However, a far more serious and lasting controversy soon arose, one that would require multiple councils to resolve. Between the years 264 and 268, Antioch became the center of intense theological debate concerning the nature of Jesus Christ and his relationship to God. These disputes were linked to the teachings of Paul of Samosata, the bishop of Antioch, whose views were widely regarded as erroneous and deeply troubling to the broader church. Because of the gravity of the issue, bishops from across a vast region, including Syria, Palestine, Arabia, Cilicia, Cappadocia, Pontus, and Lycaonia, gathered in Antioch to examine and address the matter. These synods were not minor local meetings, but large and significant assemblies representing the wider Eastern Church. They reflect both the seriousness of the doctrinal crisis and the central role Antioch played in resolving it. After careful deliberation over the course of 3 separate synods, the Church reached a decisive conclusion. In the Third Council, Paul of Samosata was formally condemned for heresy. He was deposed from his episcopal office, and Domnus of Antioch was elected to replace him, restoring Orthodox leadership to the see. Yet even this decision did not immediately bring resolution. Paul of Samosata, supported by the powerful Zenobia, managed to retain control of the episcopal residence for a time. This unusual situation, where a deposed bishop continued to hold his position through political backing, highlights the complex interplay between religious authority and secular power in the ancient world. The matter was finally settled only through imperial intervention. In 272, the Roman Emperor Aurelian issued a decree enforcing the decision of the Church. Paul was expelled, and the rightful bishop, Domnus, was able to assume full authority. This episode stands as a powerful example of how the early Church confronted doctrinal error with both theological clarity and institutional resolve. It also underscores the importance of Antioch as a center where major controversies were addressed, and where the unity and integrity of Christian teaching were defended, even in the face of political resistance and prolonged conflict. In the 4th century, many of the synods connected to the Church of Antioch were deeply shaped by the aftermath of the Arian controversy, one of the most serious theological disputes in early Christianity. These gatherings reveal how doctrinal disagreements were not merely abstract debates, but conflicts that directly affected church leadership, unity, and even political stability across the Eastern Roman world. One of the earliest major developments in this turbulent period was the Council of 330, during which the Orthodox bishop Eustathius of Antioch was deposed from his see. This decision marked a significant turning point, as the patriarchal seat of Antioch subsequently fell under Arian influence for a considerable time. The shift reflected the broader struggle between supporters of Nicene orthodoxy and those aligned with Arian theological positions, which questioned the full divinity of Christ. The controversy extended beyond Antioch itself and involved some of the most prominent figures in the wider Church. In a synod held in 340, Athanasius of Alexandria, one of the strongest defenders of Nicene orthodoxy, was himself deposed. In his place, a certain Gregory of Cappadocia was installed as bishop. However, Gregory's position was far from secure, as he could only assume control of his see under the protection of a military escort, highlighting the intense political and social tensions surrounding these ecclesiastical decisions. The following year, in 341, another important synod was convened, which confirmed the earlier deposition of Athanasius. This council took place during the dedication of the Great or Golden Church built under the patronage of Emperor Constantine, a significant event that drew many bishops together. Although the council's doctrinal formulations were not explicitly heretical, they nonetheless reflected subtle departures from the Nicene Creed, revealing the ongoing theological uncertainty and division within the Church at the time. Among the notable outcomes of this synod were 25 disciplinary canons, which were later accepted by the Universal Church, demonstrating that even in times of doctrinal conflict, the councils of Antioch contributed enduring elements to ecclesiastical law and organization. At the same time, however, the 4 creeds produced by this council, while not formally heretical, did not fully align with the precise theological language established at the Council of Nicaea, illustrating the continued struggle to define orthodox belief in the face of competing interpretations. Taken together, these events show that the 4th century synods of Antioch were not only theological battlegrounds but also key moments in the shaping of Christian doctrine and church governance. They reflect a period in which the identity of Christianity was still being actively formed, often through intense debate, political involvement, and the efforts of major church leaders striving to preserve unity amid deep and persistent division. By the late 4th century, the long period of doctrinal turbulence within the Church of Antioch began to move decisively toward a clearer affirmation of Nicene orthodoxy. A major turning point came in the year 368, when a large assembly of bishops from the eastern provinces gathered in Antioch and formally rejected Arianism. In a significant act of unity, they embraced the Nicene faith as it had been reaffirmed by Pope Damasus I in a Roman synod in 369, professing that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit share one and the same divine substance. This marked an important step toward doctrinal consensus across East and West. In the following decades, the synods of Antioch increasingly focused not only on doctrinal clarification but also on discipline and the regulation of ecclesiastical life. The Council of 388 issued a humane and stabilizing decree, forbidding acts of revenge in response to the killing of a bishop by pagan forces, thereby promoting restraint and unity in times of persecution. Shortly afterward, in 390, another synod condemned the sect of the Massalians, a group whose teachings were judged incompatible with Orthodox Christian practice, further reinforcing doctrinal boundaries within the region. As the Church moved into the 5th century, the synods of Antioch became deeply involved in the major theological controversies that shaped the Christian world. The Council of 424, for example, took decisive action against Pelagianism, ordering the expulsion of Pelagius from the city. This reflected the broader struggle within Christianity over questions of grace, free will, and salvation. The decades that followed saw Antioch repeatedly engaged in the great Christological disputes of the age, particularly those involving Nestorianism and Monophysitism. A series of synods held in 432, 447, 451, 471, 478, 481, 482, 508, 512, and 565 dealt with various phases of these controversies, as bishops worked to define the nature of Christ and preserve doctrinal unity amid widespread disagreement. These repeated councils illustrate how central Antioch remained in the ongoing theological development of the Church, even as tensions persisted across the eastern provinces. In addition to these major doctrinal issues, Antioch's synods also addressed practical matters of church governance and episcopal accountability. For instance, in 445, a synod was convened to examine the case of Athanasius of Pera, who had been brought before the Patriarch of Antioch on charges of misconduct. This demonstrates that the synods were not only concerned with abstract theology, but also with maintaining moral discipline and administrative order within the episcopate. Taken together, these developments show that the synods of Antioch in the 4th through 6th centuries played a crucial role in shaping Christian doctrine, enforcing ecclesiastical discipline, and guiding the Church through some of its most complex theological disputes. They stand as a testament to Antioch's enduring importance as a center of leadership, debate, and decision-making in the early Christian world. The later history of synodal activity in the Church of Antioch reflects a gradual transition from a vibrant center of theological debate and ecclesiastical governance to a diminished institution struggling under political domination and eventual decline. Even in its later centuries, Antioch continued to be involved in important doctrinal and administrative decisions, though its influence was increasingly shaped by external pressures and changing political realities. Around the year 542, one of the last significant early synods was convened in response to the Origenistic controversies that had arisen in Palestine. These debates, rooted in differing interpretations of the teachings of Origen of Alexandria, had spread widely throughout the Eastern Church, prompting Antioch to participate in efforts to clarify doctrine and maintain unity. This synod marks one of the final instances in which Antioch functioned as a major theological arbiter in the Byzantine Christian world. Later, during the period of Latin control following the Crusader conquest, Antioch hosted 2 additional synods, reflecting its continued, but now altered, ecclesiastical role. In 1139, the Latin Patriarch Radulf of Antioch was deposed after being accused of attempting to assert complete independence from Rome and for his harsh treatment of certain members of the clergy. This deposition highlights the tension between local patriarchal authority and the centralized oversight of the Roman Church during the Crusader period. Another important synodal decision occurred in 1204, when the papal legate Cardinal Peter intervened in political and ecclesiastical disputes involving the region. He ruled in favor of the Count of Tripoli against competing Armenian claims over the Principality of Antioch, placing Armenia under ecclesiastical interdict. This episode illustrates how deeply intertwined religious authority and political power had become in the Latin East, where church decisions often had immediate geopolitical consequences. However, the long trajectory of Antioch's ecclesiastical prominence came to a decisive end with the permanent conquest of the city by Muslim forces. After this event, ecclesiastical life in Antioch rapidly declined and eventually became almost entirely extinguished. Once a major center of Christian councils, theological debate, and patriarchal authority, the city's role in church governance faded into historical memory as new centers of Christian leadership emerged elsewhere. Thus, the final centuries of synodal activity in Antioch reveal a gradual but unmistakable decline, from a powerful and influential patriarchate shaping doctrine across the East, to a diminished institution increasingly constrained by external political control and ultimately unable to sustain its former ecclesiastical vitality. The story of the Church of Antioch is not just about councils, patriarchs, or controversies. It is a story of courage in the face of division, of truth defended through generations, and of a faith that refused to be silenced, even when the city itself lost its former glory. From the moment believers were first called Christians, to the great theological battles that shaped the Church, Antioch stands as a witness to the living history of Christianity. Its legacy challenges us today. It asks us, will we stand firm in truth as they did? Will we remain faithful through confusion, division, and change? Because in every age, the Church is called not just to exist, but to endure, to grow, and to shine. If this story educates you, don't let it end here. Subscribe and journey with us through more powerful stories of the saints, the early church, and the moments that shaped our faith. There is so much more to discover, stories that will strengthen your belief, deepen your understanding, and draw you closer to the heart of Christ.